team, Jason Moore by my side. We're a digital dream team, talking about the OneDrive, spreading love worldwide. Got that new app in our hands, it's gonna change our lives. Hit the play button, get ready for the show. Surfing through the cloud, we're taking off, let's go. Uploading all our memories, no limits, no boundaries. With OneDrive, we're dancing in the digital seas.
Jason, how did you like that OneDrive intro?
I was surprised. I did not know there would be a song powered by Copilot there, but that was great. And you know that we've recorded a couple of songs ourselves about
Really?
OneDrive, I suspect. Oh yeah, we've got a sea shanty that was written by Adam Harmitz on the team, and there's a hip hop track about OneDrive. It's something that we've enjoyed doing, so that was pretty fun to see.
I need those. We have an AI created song for every guest that we have on Teams and Rooms
Clever,
Tech Talk. So yeah, good to
clever
have you here,
use.
Jason.
Well, good
Yeah,
to be here.
welcome. Yeah, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. Normally Jimmy's here as well, but Jimmy's out in Denver at ComsV Next, doing a big show. But we have a very special guest this month, Jason Moore, our VP of Product for OneDrive and Lists, I believe.
That's right. Yeah, I'm a big fan of making lists of things, including lists of files.
Yeah, today we're going to be talking about OneDrive. Jason, tell us a little bit more about your role in Microsoft. And when
Sure.
did you start in Microsoft? How did you get here?
So I'm coming up on my 24 years at Microsoft. So when I say it out loud, it makes me feel a little bit older than I think I am. But yeah, so I started, I was actually an intern in the late 90s and then started full-time at Microsoft in 2000. And I worked on products like the Windows Shell. I worked on some old school products that, fans that are really, really deep in the lore might know, like Project M or Microsoft Codename Max. I spent some time running the Messenger service in business. You may remember as MSN Messenger or Windows Live Messenger, which was a lot of fun. Learned a ton there. But I've spent most of the last 17 years running OneDrive in some form or another, and I have the dubious distinction of having started the team way back in 2006. Yeah, I've kind of been involved from the get-go. And funnily enough, my first child was born within a couple of months of the first version of OneDrive coming out. And so I'm always marking the passage of time in the same way across the two of them, which is kind of a funny thing. But yeah, so I spent most of the last 16, 17 years working on OneDrive in some form or another. And today my role is largely caretaking for the amazing set of people we have working on building out OneDrive, building the product, working with customers on that, doing primary research, and really thinking through how do we go evolve this thing and make it the best it possibly can be. And so I've got a really awesome team that I'm very proud of and I get to spend a lot of energy with. And then, of course, connecting across the company on all those projects. We like to talk about how there's almost nothing at Microsoft that doesn't ship with a little bit of OneDrive. And so that's kind of both an amazing, amazing opportunity, but also an awesome responsibility for us as we kind of go forward. It's really my job to shepherd that.
Wow, and probably like your child as well, OneDrive has quite evolved, right? From
Oh,
simple
yes.
cloud
Oh,
storage
yes.
to more like a hub. Nearly 2 billion new files every day. Is that the number?
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, we added over 1 trillion in the last year. These are like the numbers get really big when you start thinking about big numbers, right? I remember when we started OneDrive, we debated whether we could support 50 megabyte files. And I think the very first beta was 10 megabytes. We didn't support the ability to have a thumbnail for a photo. There was a limit on the number of files in a folder. There was all these things that were very, very simplistic limits. And today, when we talk about storage, we're like, okay, well, how many exabytes do we need? And for those of you who don't throw the term exabyte around a lot, so an exabyte, right, is roughly 1,000 petabytes, which is roughly 1,000 terabytes, which is roughly 1,000 gigabytes. And so you see these add up to big numbers very, very quick. That's kind of one of the fun things is to see that grow, but also kind of how people have changed. When we first started doing it, there was a lot of pressure, I think, just to say, yeah, you can upload and download a file. Like people might want that, put that on their blog.
Mhm.
And I think now, kind of, if you look especially at the current, young generations coming up, this is just all assumed. Of course, everything's available in the cloud. Of course, it's on every single device. Of course, every single
Right.
device works perfectly with it, and I can, be free and flexible to share, collaborate with others across that, at home, at work, at school. And that's kind of, it's both amazing, but it's also a little bit kind of terrifying when you start thinking about, well, how do we make all that work really well? What are the edges? I'm one of those folks who spends a lot of time thinking about all the ways that I'm not quite doing what I want to, or not doing as well as I want to. So I spend a lot of energy on, oh, we could make that better. Wouldn't that be better? Wouldn't that be easier? How could we make that faster? Which I think is probably a good thing in product making, but it certainly is a struggle to make sure we focus on all the cool stuff that we are doing.
Yeah. How much has that change in user behavior kind of scoped this third generation of OneDrive that is now shipping?
Yeah, well, one of the interesting things is kind of, there's these two counterbalances I think we have to deal with. There's a tension, and it's a healthy tension. On the one side, I'll describe the tension that I think is a more modern one. That if you're listening and you're on the cutting edge, you're using products that the storage maybe is integrated, or the product
Mhm.
itself represents a link into the content that you're working on sharing, as well as the features all around it. You could think of a Figma or a Notion that way. And it makes a ton of sense. Those are great products. And they don't have what I think people would call a traditional file. And that's okay. But that's a big part of the world we have. And on the flip
Mhm.
side, you've got the fact that, as a computer science concept, files are like 80 years old. And I kind of always like to challenge people. Tell me another 80-year-old computing concept that's still not only valid today, but it is used by billions of people a day, that it is the fundamental heartbeat of how so much works. And I think the
Mhm.
reason that files as this human computing concept has lasted so well is, it really makes sense. People get objects, they get organizing their objects, they get finding their objects, they get putting them away. All of those things really kind of resonate in a deeply human way. And so the
Mhm.
tensions are between kind of maybe this almost older school version of a file is this binary thing, and it's got a name, and I can put it on a floppy disk or whatever, all the way to, hey, the service and code and the data itself are all integrated. And this third generation in OneDrive, one of the things it tries to do is to start bridge those together, because actually, from most users' perspective, that's not the stuff they want to think about. What they want to think
Mhm.
about is, where's the thing I'm looking for? How do I get into it? How do I share it with my coworkers? How do I send my homework assignment to my teacher? How do I get that tax, document prepared? Those are the kinds of things people are worrying about. And the idea was, well, instead of us being kind of, binary about the way you need to interact with your data, let's bring more and more of it together. So the homepage
Mhm.
of OneDrive now reflects that, right? It's this view of both things that are happening, recommendations about stuff that you want to get into, but it's inclusive of all sorts of content types that maybe aren't traditional files. Whether
Right.
it's a Power BI dashboard, whether it's that Figma design that you're working on, we think that's actually a really, really powerful capability. I use Loop that way every day when I want to go and
Mhm.
read through some loops. We're building some right now as we're working on content for next week's conference, and it's one of the fastest, easiest ways to get back in. And instead of us being kind of like, well, OneDrive's just for this or just for that, I think that this next generation represents a way to bring all this together. The other major thing, there's a whole list, but the other major thing I'll call out is the views that we've added, like the meetings view and people view. When we think about finding content, there is the easy stuff, right? So you go to the homepage, you can filter it by file type. You can say, I just want to see my Loop files. I just want to see my Word documents. You can type down into it. So you can type, Michel, and it'll, sort down to just the
Mhm.
files maybe you've shared or edited. But it's not the only way people wayfind. And when you think about the way people describe things like how to browse around, like if you've ever gone and tried to do things like, say, describe directions to a place, some people will use
Right.
distances, time, or they'll even use landmarks for that. And so these views that we have, like people and meetings, are a way to really express other wayfinding capabilities. So I love the people one, because you can just click on people, and it's going to take all of the content that's shared with you, organized by the people who are sharing it with you. And with
This is,
that
but
view,
by the way, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but this
yeah,
is
no, no, go
all
for it.
live. What all live? What I'm
Yes,
showing. So if I show you
yeah,
anything that
this is
is
all real
that is
code.
that you shouldn't see, please close your eyes, and then I'll
That's
tell you when you can reopen your eyes. because I
There's
might just
lines
share
with
some stuff
lawyers
that
that
I'm
will
not
come into
supposed
the
to
room. Don't worry,
share. Yeah.
Michelle. No, but this is exactly it. This is great. And actually what's fun here is now you've got these things up in the top right. You can filter. You could just start typing, whatever name of someone you're working with, and it's going to filter right down to that person. But I actually use this as well because I pin a couple of the people I work with the most. So my peer on the engineering side, on the design side, I have them pinned in this view so I can quickly get back to documents. Oh, I know Tyler shared that. I know Arwa
Mm,
shared that. I can go find those things. The other one that's really interesting is the meetings view. And the meetings view basically takes your calendar and organizes it based on the documents shared in those meetings. This might be because you've put it in the meeting body. Hey, here's the document we're going to review. Or it might be because in the meeting you've already had, someone shared in the chat a document or used PowerPoint Live to present it, etc. And what we try to do is really help you use the fact that you might remember that meeting to look up the right set of content for those pieces,
mhm,
including all the meeting recordings. For example, if you've got a recurring meeting, you'll also see multiple recordings. We have a number of recurring meetings. I'm sure like a lot of people do. One of my
mhm,
very favorite ones is a meeting we call OneDrive Customer Success. And what we do every month is we use that meeting to kind of talk about how are we helping customers succeed and win? How are we failing? For those things. We're pretty hard on ourselves and all the things we could do better. And as part of that, I could actually go in, if I miss one of those meetings, I could go and find the meeting, find the video, watch that again, or I could get to access to the transcript. I can even use Copilot over that transcript. So all of those pieces kind of come through where the meeting might be the kind of archetypal control for it. And the idea that these are different ways people will naturally go find content and remember content and wayfind on it is pretty powerful. It goes beyond just folder structure. Now, of course, if you're as old as I, you might have built folders around all these things in the past.
yeah.
And that's actually still, of course, 100% supported, and you can totally do that. But the idea being that for, everybody out there, not having to create that content, not having to build those organizations themselves, naturally pulling it out of the activities that you've already done, the people you work with, that's really,
Mhm,
really compelling. And over time, we'll continue to add new views like that as people suggest interesting ones, as we can find things that are thoughtful there. And I think in particular with the power of AI. So beyond just where we are today, but looking ahead as we think about Copilot, I think there's a really huge opportunity to say, how will Copilot help organize that content for me in a way that's going to help me, Jason, personally find my way back to it. So those things really come through as kind of critical for making OD3 fast. And something I should probably mention that I sometimes talk about when we talk about OD3, but not all the time, is we actually have a metric that we look at that's really, really important. And I think always good to understand metrics. People have goals they have, right? It dictates a lot of the behavior, very
mhm,
reasonable. And one of the ones for us in the OD team is really this goal we call TTF, or time to file. And the idea is that there is a number of seconds it takes for you to find a file. And
mm,
what we look for is, how can we improve that? We're not your Facebook, your Instagram, your Netflix. We don't measure our success on the number of minutes you spend using OneDrive. That's not a
mm,
goal. We think our success comes from helping you be productive. And in fact, if we shave off minutes in your day of spending time, that's actually success. But because of that, it leads us to these features where we're really trying to say, gosh, how quickly can we get someone to the right document as fast as possible? And so we measure that globally across these things. And what's really interesting is over the course of the rollout of the generation 3 of OneDrive here, we've seen about a 50% reduction in the amount of time it takes
wow.
to find a file successfully and for people to get into it. There's lots of interesting other cases. One of the things that we're starting to look at is for the ones that take a really long time, are they really taking a really long time, or is there something else that someone's trying to do with the content? How can we be smarter about that? And I think, as we look forward again on Copilot, and we've shown some of this in some of our demos and talks over the last 6 months, you'll start to see us kind of saying, okay, where can AI help with that? Will it be,
Mhm,
smart about those pieces? The example, maybe the most rudimentary example of AI we use today in the OD3 product is that recommended strip across the top. And the
mhm,
recommended strip is really simply just trying to say, hey, we think these are the files you're going to look for. And we use a combination of the graph of information around that. It was presented in a meeting. It was edited by someone you work with, those kinds of things. You are mentioned in a comment, and recency on those. So we're trying to say, gosh, we think these are the things you're working on. And then we measure that as well. So each of these features, we talk about time to file, but we also going to go, okay, gosh, how often did you click on something in that recommended strip? How much do you
mm,
need to click on something for us to say it's a good use of those pixels? It's a lot of pixels. We want to be
right.
thoughtful about it.
Hmm. That's it. I never thought about it. So what is the TTF? Is that a number we share
Ooh,
or?
No, we don't. We don't, because it's changing all the time. No, we've talked a lot about this. It's a tough one. It is sub 30 seconds, but what you'll find is that depending on the organization, the user's job, like the role they play, the kind of content they work with, you get quite a bit of variation. So if you're predominantly working with like Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, kind of traditional Office documents, we find that this is incredibly fast. If you're working with content that maybe doesn't have the same richness in it, so for example, a text file doesn't really support @mentions. You'll find, JPEG might not support @mentions, natively in it, or it doesn't support real-time collaboration. There are fewer signals, and so the more your job might depend on that, it's not quite as easy there. But the other one is, as you look at photo and video content, you might notice that this view is really optimized for file names.
This is a
So,
scary one
you've
because I have
already
no
figured it
idea.
out. Yeah, so there's this media view that we've been rolling out in OneDrive, and it's really the first generation of this, but it's actually to directly tackle this around time to file, which is this notion of, hey, for photo and video content, for image content, I'll even say for design content, and be a little bit vague and broad about it. The idea is that we make it really easy to kind of quickly get back and provide a view that's more natural to it. So you'll notice that there's not a lot of gaps between things. There's not a huge amount of space for file names. We've really tried to pack in as much visual information, make it as dense as possible. And even you'll notice that we size the rows and columns differently for each one in order to get more of those pixels on screen around that. There's plenty of controls on those things. You can play with all of that in these views. Yeah, exactly as Michelle's showing right now. And the idea is to make it really easy for you to get back to stuff. And then on the right side, you might notice that when you hover that scroll bar, you start scrolling. It's actually a time-based scroll bar on the vertical right. And what that's telling you is that you can actually then use time as a way to get back to content. Because one of the things that we often have in photos and videos is time data. And so it becomes a meaningful way to wayfind. And you can go back and say, oh, what happened way back in time? How do I find the right thing there? And it's all presented with that. This is really the first version of it, but this is something that we're really excited to watch and kind of learn about. Okay, for this content, what's unique about it? How do we make it easier and better? This is a great question of like, what would type down be here? What would filtering look like here? What are the kinds of filters you would need to make media view great? We're hoping to both learn from our own research that we do with our research team, but also just feedback from customers as they play with it.
Speak a little bit about that, because
Yeah.
often customers and partners think that, so they see the user voice, they see the option to
Yeah, yeah,
record
yeah.
feedback, whether it's a
Yeah,
bug
yeah,
or
yeah.
a problem or just a suggestion. And often people think that's just some kind of black hole that you dump your IDs in. But
Yeah.
but your teams are actually looking at that feedback, and that ends up somewhere often in the product.
Oh yeah, and so it depends on the different entry points. There's different ways we take in data, everything from crash reports or just bug reports into kind of feature requests. But each of the teams that we have is responsible for bringing all that content in and presenting it on a monthly basis, being able to talk about where are the investments they're making, what are people talking about, where are the challenges. We kind of go back to there's a great old story that I believe it comes from Amazon, talking about, hey, the numbers on support calls, the wait time on support calls is pretty good, but people are complaining that support calls take forever. And so in the middle of the meeting, I believe Jeff Bezos just called support, and it took a really long time. And the kind of takeaway was, hey, you got data and anecdotes and they don't line up, believe those anecdotes. And so we try to do the same thing and really have a perspective that says, yes, we need to look at data at scale. So we look at the number of crashes or the perf reports for every page load on the planet every single day, and look at those in aggregate, look at those, by region, by all sorts of different variables, even by, say, browser. Are we seeing something? Did we do something that made, Edge slightly slower than another browser or something like that?
Mhm.
And then at the same time, we go and look at all the verbatims. And what's really cool with our verbatim technology is we tie this to things like traditional scores like NPS, which is Net Promoter Score, standard
Yep.
industry kind of scoring mechanism. That's a good wayfinder for it. It tends to be a lagging metric, so it takes a while to update and change as you make changes, but it's a stable one and it's useful for us. But with that, people write in a lot of feedback and comments. And we can take in streams, whether it's from a bug report, whether it's from answering a survey. And we actually run a number of processing jobs over that. And this, again, uses AI to go and say, okay, well, what's the sentiment? Are people happy or sad when they're telling us this stuff? Are they saying, here's a great feature? Or are they saying, this thing is broken and it's terrible. And so that's kind of an interesting kind of thing that we play with as we go and kind of work on how to get the right content in. And then each team is then responsible. For the leaders of the sync team or the leaders of the mobile team, they're responsible for pulling that content together. And then we look at what are commonalities and themes across the board, and what are things that are unique for maybe that endpoint. We're getting particular feedback that they need to go sort through.
Right. It seems like we lost your video, by the way,
Oh
or at least
no,
you froze.
that's
So not sure if that's something you can fix. If not, don't worry about it. As long as we have audio, we're good.
good.
Although I must say, the still is not really flattering.
That's
Completely different story.
I'll see if I can do something while we go here.
Speaking of, so you talked about the behavior of OneDrive in different browsers, but also in different apps, right? By the way,
Yeah.
I must say that this icon in Teams.
Oh yes,
It's pretty nice. I don't know who came up with that.
That's
and made the final tweaks.
Yes. Yes. No. Actually, you and I talked about this a whole bunch, and I know where you're going with it. For folks that are listening in, what we'd done with this is we had previously an outline icon that I certainly didn't love. I know you didn't love, and you poked on it again, which was just the perfect moment for me to go and tell the team, like, guys, we really can do better. How are we going to do better? What's that going to look like? What are we doing with all of that? And that was kind of a useful conversation, I think, for helping the team, recognize. I think I've got video back. You're gonna have to tell me.
Yeah, it's back. It's back.
Yes. Recognizing, just kind of how we really made sure it looked its best possible. Icon design is always this really fun thing. I've been through many icon designs at the company. I was responsible for a lot of the new icons, even starting back as Windows XP. And so I've always been particularly sensitive to those things. From my favorite bug report I ever got on an icon that I remember to this day was for an iOmega drive. And I can't remember exactly, was it an orb drive or a zip drive? But we had an icon we'd made for them. And I believe the user feedback was just to show that we pay attention to this verbatims and it doesn't go into a black hole. It's still in my brain, 24 years later, it looks like Darth Vader's room humidifier. Wow. And that's always stuck with me. And I think about that story often when I look at icons and I go, ooh, how do you get that right? One of the biggest ones I think we've probably debated ad nauseum is for the cloud icon for OneDrive, either in the menu bar on the Mac or in the taskbar in Windows. And how do we get that exactly right? And how do we do that right? And gosh, it's this cloud. We've had that cloud icon for a long time. It's great. It's a great brand. There's lots of cloud icons. How do we stand out? What is ours? For those of you listening who use OneDrive at home and at work, you may be like, well, one's blue and one's white. What's that about? And it's all part of distinguishing these things and kind of communicating different pieces. But over time, I think this will be a space that continues to evolve. There's every 5 to 7 years or so, we kind of go, it's time for some exciting new icons. We need to refresh all of these things. And the same conversations happen again.
Yeah, it's not where I was going, by the way. But
that's
on my Connect, which is the internal yearly thing you go through with your manager, and on my LinkedIn, I will say I influenced the
absolutely
the icon.
Absolutely. Let me know if you need a comment for that. I'll put something.
Thanks. But where I was going was the decision on MetaOS app versus native app per different application you want to work in. And it seems like with OneDrive, you chose for MetaOS, meaning same type of code everywhere.
Yeah.
What are the decisions you have to make, and maybe some of the consents that you have to make on the decision? Am I going MetaOS app, or am I going into a different direction?
Yeah, I mean, a big part of this is what do customers really need? There's an element of what do they want, but what do they need? What's the capability they need? And with the MetaOS kind of version of OneDrive, so now it shows up in Teams, in Outlook, across all sorts, web and desktop apps and all of those pieces. It's coming to more. As part of that story, what are we trying to do? Well, a big part of it is to say, hey, wherever we've taught you how to access files, it should work consistently in the same way. And when we say consistently in the same way, we don't mean kind of the same way. We mean it should really, really, really be the same way. And where the characteristics of the host enables us to do this through like MetaOS, that's a real scale thing. So now we can build it. And when we add a new feature to OneDrive, it'll show up on the website, and the same day it'll show up in Teams, and the same day it'll show up in Outlook. And so whatever you're using, you're getting the full benefit of those capabilities. That is, the right thing for kind of an end user, for a customer. It's the thing we want to enable and provide for them. Now, of course, that's not always the case, though, in every possible circumstance. So when you look at things like your iPad or your Android phone, these are devices where the characteristics of the platform are very, very different. And the way we want to build that is going to be nuanced as a result. So we build these native apps on both iOS and Android as a result of that for OneDrive. And they're quite popular. I think like the fourth or something largest Microsoft mobile apps. And with that, you kind of spend a lot of energy then going into, well, what are we trying to do here for that user? What are we trying to take advantage of? One of the great things about mobile platforms is they have so many services and capabilities available. Being fully native to them lets you plug into a lot of those pieces. And we want to do that in a way that's battery friendly. We want to do that in a way that's smart to the security and privacy constraints on the device. We want to operate really well in those. And the list goes on and on. Of course, the list of requirements that you think about. For those of you managing devices for your organization, you're probably thinking about, when they Intune policies and how do I roll those out and have control through all of those. Those are all considerations that go into that, and we really want to make sure we do the right thing. In the case of the MetaOS capabilities, these are all on larger screens. They're on devices that we can kind of luxuriate a bit more in the pixels, and the devices that you tend to use, like a trackpad and a mouse, a keyboard, they tend to lend themselves to that UI really well and work well for them. So that combination of the right system for the device that you're on, the capabilities that it has, the interface that you're going to interact with it, and then being able to bring the richness of those features and roll them as fast as possible. We tend to ship fastest through our MetaOS and web technology. And so we want to be able to bring the best new things to the most amount of people on day one as part of that. That's probably one of the biggest things we deal with is folks going, hey, I love that feature here. Can I get that over there?
Right.
And that's just our job, right, is to make sure it shows up everywhere. But there are obviously differences in how we build them and how do we abide by the local systems.
I want to talk about security, and of course, we're going to
Yeah.
end with Copilot, because you and I have a KPI that we need to say Copilot at least 5 times every session. But before we do that, there's a question coming in. By the way, if you're watching this live, feel free to ask questions in the chat. Jason will answer as many as we can. Hello from Germany. Is there a possibility to work with GPS data in pictures taken from smartphones, or is there a plan?
Ooh, great question. So yes, today, if you use the consumer product, you'll notice when you go to a photo and open it up, we'll use the GPS data to show you location where the photo was taken and expose some of that. Over time, I would expect a lot more to happen here. This is one of those really interesting things where getting smart about different data types is really important. So we've added, in the last 7 years or so, over 350 different data types, file types that we understand natively in OneDrive. So you can view all those things from AutoCAD to, I don't have a Z word file, but I'm sure there's a great one out there. But there is a huge, huge range of content like that. And we be able to view all those things when you're sharing them. People can kind of at least get the basics. But the next stage of that, like we showed with the media view here, is really starting to get smart about unique nuances or capabilities of that. And so when you talk about photos that are taken from smartphones, GPS data is fully, through those things. It's really powerful to be able to do that. And you can imagine both free-form capabilities on that and kind of smarter ways to leverage it. So this is one that today the basics that we do are really being able to browse and organize and find. So if you're using your OneDrive consumer account and you put your photos in, you'll see on an individual photo the GPS data. And if you go and look at the photos experience, you'll actually be able to navigate based on places and see photos from places. So you can say, show me all my photos from Stuttgart, or show me all my photos from Bali. Like, all of that is possible through that experience. Over time, there'll be more. If you're part of our current preview with our new search tech for photos and consumer, you'll see something even more magical. And what you can do there is actually go in and say things like, hey, show me all the photos of my family smiling on the beach in Thailand. And it's capable of doing that, pulling those things together. And so it leverages data on location in order to build that view and lets you kind of be able to experience your photos and remember kind of that amazing vacation, or even see a set of photos taken over time at the same location across those. That's a pretty cool thing. I know today we've capped that preview as people are trying it out, sending us feedback. I really do appreciate all of that. But that will definitely be something we bring out much more broadly for everyone to be able to try. And over time, I think you'll find more places that you'll see these capabilities around GPS and other metadata show up.
Very exciting. Let's talk security because
Yeah.
I mean, admins are I mean, security is their everyday thing, and what's more precious than in an organization than their data and their files?
Yeah.
So how is OneDrive helping admins to make their life easier?
Yeah. There's kind of, there's so much to talk about. We could do a couple hours of show on all of these things because the
Mm,
first thing everyone has to remember is OneDrive's built on SharePoint. And
yeah.
that means we get all the security, governance, compliance capabilities out of the box as part of that. And, we are really one team on those things, building those new capabilities out. So we really see that as first and foremost our biggest and most important duty across that. And that means that from the word go, things are safe and secure by default. That flows through OneDrive and a number of other places. One of the things we like to remind people is that every file in OneDrive is private by default, that it takes an act in order to share things, to get things out. We think that's also an important thing for safety. It means that by default, you're not doing the wrong thing. By default, you're in a safe space and you can do the right thing. But that's kind of the baseline. So we think that's really important, that the baseline is as high as possible for security. Beyond that, I'd say there's three major categories to think about in terms of just pure security. The first is the actual kind of value of OneDrive is using it to get content off devices or create more security for those devices. So the simple version is things like the camera roll backup we do in consumer and in commercial off your phone device, being able to back up the photos. That's a great little feature, providing backup through those things. But probably the most common one in commercial setting or education setting is the known folder move, where you basically point your OneDrive, your folders like documents, pictures, desktop into your OneDrive folder, and those are all backed up in the cloud. And people often say to me, well, how is that part of your security stance? And it's actually a couple of different factors. The first is, well, now that it's all in the cloud, you can audit what happens with all of that content. That's a really big deal. Once it's all in the cloud, you can back it up. You have a snapshot. You can restore it. Ever since we did this, I can't tell you the number of mails I've gotten from folks talking about how, they had someone traveling, their laptop got stolen or damaged. They were able to walk into a store, get a laptop, get signed in, be AAD joined, and immediately have all their content back again. And that's a security stance we think is really important. The last part, though, of that is, whenever we talk about things like compliance, you talk about e-discovery, you talk about being able to run scans over content, whether it's for ransomware, viruses. All of that is only possible when your content's in the cloud, really at scale. And so we think of that backup motion on the desktop of connecting it to the cloud as a key way you enable all of that and get the value out of OneDrive and SharePoint. The second is really around how we think about security settings in terms of sharing and capabilities there. So a big part of that, of course, is the logging capabilities that exist there. If you're familiar with some of the new capabilities around SharePoint Advanced Management, there's even more richness and depth in all of that, which is really righteous. But really the basics out of box is for admins to be in control of how people share. What is the default ways people share? What are the settings for those? Every organization has slightly different needs. You talk to a nonprofit organization, and they're often going to be really focused on how, this isn't private information. We need to share it broadly and quickly and make that really easily without a lot of expensive training for volunteers. But you might also talk to a financial organization. They're like, wow, we got to lock this stuff down. We are under a highly regulated environment and need to be on top of that. And so the system that we've built with OneDrive on top of SharePoint gives you a lot of control over those defaults, over being able to log all of that, see what happens, to know what access is happening, and to be able to, of course, to change any of that at a moment's notice. So if you need to roll out a new change, you need to lock things down, you can do that. One of the things people ask me often is like, hey, what about attachments? Where attachments going in mail? And I think attachments are, it's probably one of those long-lived fundamentals of computing. But what we really see as organizations move to link-based sharing for the most part, they gain a lot of peace of mind because now every access to that file is tracked. That file can be locked down at any given moment. You can change your mind as situation changes or new content is introduced. And so that's really important. And that last part that I'd say in all of this really comes down to the ability to run smart policies over this. So for example, at Microsoft, we run policies that if it detects certain content in a document, it'll apply a label to that content. And it'll make sure it'll say, hey, you know what, this content needs to be encrypted by default. It needs to have this kind of label, only these kinds of rights and privileges applied to it. And you can run that at scale in your tenant. And so that ability to kind of both before the fact, through the acts of engagement and sharing of content and where it's all at, and the ability to, kind of post facto come back to things and make changes or do it real time as things change is an enormous superpower. So you can sleep well at night across that. And that's not really getting into all of the deep features and kind of tips and tricks of how do you go manage at scale? How do you manage the deployments across that? The differences you might do in setting up a team site for your finance team that might have reporting regulatory requirements versus your marketing team or your evangelism team that maybe they operate much more in the public or they work with vendors. Those things, the ability to have controls across that really matters. And then as you layer on anything else in M365, it inherits all of that. So if your team is working in teams, all of this stuff works, all of this stuff is held through that. You can use the same notions and capabilities, and you have the security principles that Teams expose you, like a shared channel or a private channel. All of that's respected, and it's natively throughout the entire stack. And if you go into Word, you go into OneNote, you go into any of these other services, they're all respecting and playing along with that, and they may add new capabilities on top. And so when we think about security, that's kind of a big part of the pieces there. The last I might add is, I mentioned a little bit, auditing the data on these things. I mentioned the SharePoint Advanced Management capabilities. One of the things that we know is really important for peace of mind is for people to see, right? Not just believe, but to see. And seeing is believing in all of that. So this ability across these different interfaces and experiences to know what's going on, from the sync client health reports to know, hey, is that machine backing up? Is that user having a good time with sync, to sharing access reports, to everything else that happens in the system, access checks and whatnot. Those really allow you to kind of go and say, I can verify all of these things, and I can report on that and feel confident that the right things are happening. Putting that power into the hands of the admin user, I think, is a big part of the value that we create there, and also a big part of our responsibility, just to make sure that, when we say you can trust us and you say you can trust our system, we've done a way that you can actually go and see if you can trust us. You can go and validate and feel good about it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's something that is often overlooked when you decide on a suite instead of just single products, right? You inherit all that when it comes to compliance and security and privacy. You mentioned attachment. We made a little bit of a change to the attachment of recorded meetings.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Recently, and I think that's knowing that our audience is a big meeting audience as well. So now, if you have a meeting and you record it, previously that meeting would be stored in the OneDrive of the person that first joined the meeting. Now it's actually in the OneDrive of the organizer, which is something I think is important to know for the folks here.
Oh, yeah,
like I said. Yeah, Copilot. We need to mention it at least 5 times during the stream. So there is a Copilot button there now in the new app. What can it do, and what's the power that people will take out of it?
Yeah, so we've started showing some of this. We have it right now in preview as we're doing the first steps with Copilot. There's kind of 2 ways to think about Copilot in OneDrive. The first one is, so many of the things that people are already doing with Copilot are grounded in OneDrive. When you're in Word and you're using Copilot against your document there, that's enabled against your content in OneDrive. If you do, like in PowerPoint, you can go and say, let me pull this Word document and create slides based off of it. Again, that's part of our integration that we've done across the board. So one of the things we think is really valuable with Copilot is that wherever you're getting into Copilot, how can we make it accessible to get to your content so you can work with all the content about, you care about, that's relevant to you, to be productive and useful? And I think a lot of folks think about Copilot just in the context of an app. I'm using it in this app, so it's only related to this app. But it's actually one of the biggest powers in my mind is wherever I am with Copilot. If I've launched it from the taskbar on Windows, from that button, I should be able to work with that content to do interesting things. And hey, back to that time to file we talked about at the very beginning. That's a part of it. I didn't even have to launch the OneDrive website to get to my file and do something useful with it. We love that. We think that's actually a superpower of the system. But the other one then, and what you're seeing here in Teams, for example, and you'll start seeing in a number of other places, is a Copilot showing up inline in OneDrive. And there's kind of two flavors of that I'd call out. The first is just the chat window opening up, so you can do kind of the typical Copilot chat experience that you've seen anywhere, the same skills and capabilities we really want to bring across the board for all of them. And the first features starting to show up here are things like summarize this file or compare these two files. One of my favorite examples of a scenario someone walked me through was an IT administrator working on network policies. And he was writing a document on wireless access policy for his organization. And, kind of idly was like, well, Copilot, is there any contradictions in this document? And it said, yeah, there's 4 contradictions. He was like, wow, that saved me a ton of time. We could find it. We're like, great, value in Copilot. But even cooler, he could go back and go to a folder of all of the policy documents and say, do any of these policy documents have policies that contradict each other? And what would take hours and be tedious and painful, Copilot's doing in seconds. It's reading through those documents, it's looking up those things, and it's telling you what it sees as contradictions. And you can say, hey, put it into a pretty little table and add a column for each author and the name of the document and how many counts of errors there are, so we can portion this out to folks to work on. So those kind of capabilities you'll see starting to show up, that comparison kind of capability. You can also extract information, and this shows up in a number of ways, like being able to essentially do almost frequently asked questions against a document, but to say things like, hey, I've got a document on a procurement plan. What's the bill look like? Who are the main contractors? It can answer questions out of your document. But even cooler than that is you can start to say, well, let me pull some data out of that and compare it with another one and say, build a table of all of the unit prices across all of these documents and pull that together. So this idea that we can quickly get into your document and do stuff with it, work with that, extract content and do something useful, that's the kind of first generation of what you'll see with that Copilot experience. The other part that I mentioned is you're going to start to see user experiences that really try to bring it more in line. And the first one is kind of the first one that we did actually is my favorite example to date, which is in the sharing dialog. When you try to go share, it'll say, hey, you can type in people you want to share with, you can type a message, but the Copilot button shows up as well. And it goes, hey, do you want us to just summarize this document? So when you send this mail, it's got a summary. And the coolest part about that is not only will it generate the summary and put it in, but you can change it. You can be like, oh, I want to tweak this, or I want to, hey, Jason, pay attention to this section when you go read the document or whatever. All of that is capable, and that's just Copilot working in line. You're not having a chat with Copilot so much as Copilot's just working on your behalf. And you'll see over time as we add more.
Can I show that without my account being blocked?
I think you can. I've shown demos of it before, so you go for it. You have my permission.
Good.
When you go and share, choose like a great like Word document or something. That's usually a good one to do. Or you can do Excel. So you start seeing some of those verbs showing up. But when you go and do the share button, that's the Copilot button. Yeah. When you go and do the share button, you'll see Copilot show up in line in the sharing experience. When you go and do the, you'll see in that right there. Yeah. And so it's trying to say, okay, how can I help you? How can I pull stuff in? How can I create content for you? How can I generate that? And it's going to teach you all about the latest.
Yeah, it's going to teach me all that.
And so it's going to pull all of that in and let you do that right in line in the experience. The other ones that you saw there is also the verbs showing up on that experience. You'll start to see things like Copilot verbs just kind of in line. The idea that you didn't have to go to Copilot and just type it. You could say, hey, let me just click on this thing and get a summary of it. Hey, let me just click on this thing and get a analysis or compare it across multiple documents. We think making it even easier to get into those capabilities, those skills, is going to be an important part of the feature.
Right. Always when you're trying to demo something, stuff like that happens.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
But that's when you mess around with some of the latest.
That's right. You're living with it. No, but do submit the feedback. We'll go look at it. And this is one of the interesting things, as we do this, we're working to kind of get these first generation of features polished and done and out the door. They got to work super reliably, be great, be super fast. I'm excited for all of that, but it's also kicking off so many ideas for what's next. And one of the things I'm most excited to hear from people is kind of what are the features they want it to do? What are they expecting from this magical, superpower that sits next to them and helps them along? we probably have more ideas than we have engineers to do right now. And so a big part of what we're doing is trying to figure out, like, wait, which ones do we get after next? How do we demonstrate this capability? How do we kind of excite? What are the things that we can just depend on Copilot getting smarter about, and we don't have to necessarily do something directly? We can go build something else. One of the last features I'll mention with Copilot, because I do have to hit my Copilot word count, is this feature we call Catch Up. And I demoed this back in October at our October event for OneDrive. And it's a really, really cool feature. The idea that, hey, maybe you're out of the office for an offsite, maybe you're out of the office on vacation. For those of you in Europe, I know that this is a conversation you have in early September. Hey, how do I catch up on everything? And this experience of people have edited documents, they've commented, they shared, they've done all sorts of stuff with them. It's actually kind of hard to get back on top of without just going through every single item in your inbox and trying to reconstruct it like some sort of crime scene, forensic analysis of what's happened with sharing and collaboration. And the catch-up feature is really saying, well, let's take all that data. We can take the raw data of all that stuff, and we can give it to Copilot and say, Copilot, what's important? What should I know? Hey, there was 15,000 edits and emails back and forth on this presentation. What's the state now? Right? And Copilot can do that really efficiently. And so this catch-up feature, we think, is another one of these powerful ways to really demonstrate how you can save hours of tedium in all of that and be productive and successful, because, hey, Copilot says, oh, by the way, you have these 3 messages from your boss that didn't get handled. You should probably look at those. Oh, and this document was finished, and you can go read it, but it's not pressing. Hey, this document has a bunch of things waiting on you. Here's the top 5 comments or something. Those capabilities, we think, will really kind of shine a light on how Copilot really is that partner for you, and kind of watching your back, checking things for you, and being able to quickly sort through vast arrays of information to really make the most salient things and the most productive activities to take obvious.
Right. We've been playing around with Copilot for over a year now, I think, internally.
Yeah.
We've been quite still up until this day, Jason, there's not one week where I'm not just blown away by something new I find that Copilot for Microsoft 365 can do. I hate to ask you this question because you just shipped Generation 3. So that's like having a baby and then asking when's the next one coming. But what do you think needs to happen for what's the direction? What should the direction be of Gen 4 with?
Yeah, I can give a sense for that. There's a couple of things. There's a couple of things that really stand out for me. One of them is while we've launched Gen 3 and it's awesome and hundreds of millions of people are experiencing it, not everyone's experiencing it. It's not on every endpoint. If you look at our mobile app, it hasn't really been updated in the same way, the visual language and style there. So I wouldn't be surprised if changes come to mobile and some improvements in some exciting ways there. We talked about media content. I think you'll see us make even more investments in that. It's pretty obvious that this is a really powerful place. Funnily enough, I think people often think of Microsoft 365 in terms of work documents, Word, Excel, PowerPoint kind of stuff. And there's a lot of those. But our most common files are images. And people work with images every single day in M365. And video. And of course, with things like Teams meeting recordings, it just exploded. And so that kind of era of growth for that content and the need for great tools, it was only about a year ago or so that we shipped things like the ability to crop an image in OneDrive. Now all of those capabilities are kind of more natively coming out. And I think you'll see us do more and more across that. And that's in partnership with great products like Designer, Clipchamp, et cetera. Last year we got Clipchamp integrated into OneDrive, and that's been awesome. I know that's been seeing huge growth for Clipchamp. And just the idea that kind of natively I've got my cloud space for working on this content, for sharing it, doing it, and this amazing video editor that runs pretty much everywhere. Those kinds of capabilities, I think you'll see us extend and go deeper on as we think more and more about them. But what's probably the biggest share of our investments is actually fundamentals across the board. And I mean that in 2 ways. The first is maybe what most people are thinking of. It's like performance and reliability. We just sweat this. This is what the majority of our team works on. If you look at just a count of the engineers, there are more engineers that work on fundamentals of performance, security, reliability than everything else combined. And that's really important. We think that day in, day out, the job you hire us for is first not to fall on our face. We got to do the right thing and make that really great. And then everything else on top can be gravy. But the other part of fundamentals, just in my experience as a product maker, is thinking about how can we make this smoother, faster as an experience. So you'll see us continue. Over the last year, we've made a lot of changes to the sharing experience and simplifying that. It's so much faster to load. We've more than doubled. It's used more than 1 billion times a month now. We think we can go even further with that. And so you'll see more investment in the fundamentals of that experience. How do we make that rock solid reliable? How do we make sure that everyone has the utmost confidence that when they share, it's doing exactly what they intend and what they expect? How do we make sure that wherever you access that content, it's going to be treated in the right way and handled appropriately? There are rough edges that come with any kind of sharing experiences. We're working on filing and sawing off as many of those as possible, really to make sure that the entire system is as seamless and sealed as it can be as part of that experience. And so fundamentals, I think, will continue to be a big, big focus for us. And then you wrap all that together, you go, okay, great. We're going to go improve these experiences. We're going to bring new visuals and life to it. We're going to bring faster ways to get into my content. It'll be safer, more reliable, more understandable. It'll be easier for more people to use. And on top of that, we're going to bring Copilot and infuse it throughout it. So AI is probably that last column that I'd call out. You'll see that just surface in to your point, like every week seeing something new. It's just wild. And there's so much awesome stuff to be done. I think our biggest challenge is not do we have amazing stuff to bring to the table, but how do we not break the table by bringing too much stuff, right? Picking and choosing and really being intentional. We talk about this learning and growth and having growth mindsets, and that's really applying to all of us as well as we think about how should this change the way we work? What are things that we held dear we should now rethink? Where can Copilot help? Where can it play a role? And then how do we make sure that above all, people feel safe and secure, that people are in control of what their AI does on their behalf, and that they know that it's working for them. And so that, I think, you'll find throughout the entire conversation, the entire experience is going to show up in a lot of ways. And sometimes it's going to feel like, oh, there's a little new feature here, new capability there. And sometimes you're going to feel like, oh my gosh, there was a huge moment and they dumped a ton of new features. And we're trying to be thoughtful about all of those. But I'm really excited about that.
Good. A lot of great stuff coming short term. Next week, I think, Microsoft 365 conference, you will be there. I think the whole team will be there, no?
Oh, yeah. We've got a ton of folks, the most we've had at a conference in a long time. It's going to be an amazing conference. We got so much content. There's so much depth we're going into. I think, we're at a point where this explosion of data in the cloud, of the tools, the needs for people to collaborate and work together, the need for so many different parts of our suite to work together. Whether you're talking about Viva or you're talking about Copilot Studio, you're talking about any of the Power Apps, you're talking about Teams, you're talking about Outlook, you're talking about Word. There's so much stuff that's going on and happening. The conference next week, I think, will be a great kind of left to right view of that, plus how AI is getting infused across all of it. And there's just more to come, but next week should be a lot of fun, and I'm excited to see everyone there.
I'm probably going to have a lot of FOMO just looking at those pictures. I know we talked about me making it out to Orlando, but unfortunately I couldn't. But
we'll do the next one.
We'll do the next one. Jason, thank you so much for joining me today on the show. Everyone, thanks for watching. This is the part I hate the most, but make sure you like and subscribe. It really helps us a whole lot. We're looking forward to seeing you again on the next one. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, Michel.